Today is April 26, 2018. My name is Allison Richmond, and I am interviewing Larry Caldwell in Stillwater, Oklahoma, as part of our Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project. Larry currently works for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission as a watershed specialist and is an Earth Team volunteer with the National Resources Conservation Service. Larry has been working in conservation for over 40 years, and I look forward to hearing the stories you have to share. So thank you for taking this time with me today. So let's start with where and when were you born?
I was born on August 15th, 1950, and was born in northwest Iowa and raised on a small farm up around Cherokee, O'Brien County line.
Okay. Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I have one older sister and one younger brother.
And what did your parents do?
They were farming. We had a small farm, about 240 acres of corn and soybeans and oats and cattle and hogs. It was a very close-knit community up there. All the farmers helped each other out on baling hay and cutting silage, and we did a lot of things together with card parties and potluck suppers, and our whole world consisted of about 10 square miles in that area.
Yeah, small town. So what was a typical school day like for you? Did you have any sports or anything that you participated in? Or
A little bit. I wasn't great in sports. We rode on a school bus and pick us up. We were about 8 or 9 miles from town, so we'd make the route on all the gravel roads to pick up all the other kids on the route and get to school. All of the classes were in a small town called Sutherland, and we'd go through the class day there, and then sports afterwards, and then ride the school bus home, and then do chores.
Where did you end up going to college?
Went to Iowa State University at Ames, Iowa.
Okay. How did you decide to go there?
Well, I originally was going to go to Brookings, South Dakota. We had a good ag program up there. But a lot of kids in our class, we didn't have a large class. I think there was about 40 people who graduated. And a lot of them were going to Iowa State down at Ames. So I figured they might know something that I didn't. So I put down an ACT test for Iowa State. And then I got a postcard when I was still a senior in high school, and said that they were starting a new co-op program with the Soil Conservation Service. And if you were interested in conservation and wanted to be an agricultural engineer, that they would have a summer job for you that summer in your county office. So I immediately wrote back and said, I'm interested in conservation and I want to be an ag engineer. And soon I got a letter accepted to start working with the county SCS office there in our hometown. And so I graduated from high school on a Friday, and I started with SCS the following Monday morning.
So how did you get interested in conservation and agriculture?
Well, growing up on a farm, and in northwest Iowa especially, you had to be interested in conservation for just maintaining keep the soil from eroding away. And so whole life we'd been involved in agriculture, so I knew I wanted to stay in agriculture, and there wasn't an opportunity to go back to the farm. So, and I always liked math and sciences, so ag engineering seemed to be a good fit.
Mm-hmm. So did you know what soil conservation was at the time, or was it just kind of?
No, we would always have the local Soil Conservation Service office come out, and they'd lay out contours every year and put in waterways. And we lived about a mile from the Little Sioux River, and that was one of the early watershed projects in Iowa at the time. I didn't realize that at the time, but they were always building dams somewhere around the place. So when I'd get off the school bus at night, I'd change clothes and get on my bicycle and ride to the closest dam they were building. I'd like to sit up on the hillside and watch all the dozers and scrapers and move the dirt around and all. And we would have when it would rain in our yards and all around where the machinery was, there'd be water running down different places. We'd go out and play in the rain and make little dams and then break them and watch the water run downhill. So we were always working with playing with water there. So
yeah, that's one way. So what did you study at Iowa State?
It was agricultural engineering.
Okay.
So started there and went through ended up being a 5-year co-op program that they were just starting. We were in the first class. There was another fellow and I that were in the first class of that. So we'd go to school, or we'd have a job for 3 months in the summer and then go to school for 9 months. And then as we got into the sophomore and junior years, we would go to school for six months and then work 6 months. And each time they would move us around different locations, different offices around the state. So you'd work in field offices and area offices and project offices, and then worked in the state office for the design staff and planning staff and all. So after 5 years, they had a good introduction to SES and the type of work they did.
Yeah. So where did you go from your co-op? Did you go like straight into another job, or?
Yes, and that was a nice part of this too, that they'd offer you a job when you graduated. And I went with SCS, and the first job I took on was a rather unique one. It was up in north central Iowa, up at right on the Minnesota-Iowa border. And it was unique work for watershed work. It was all completely drainage of channels and large underground drain tile. And it was an area that needed the drain tile in order to farm because it was too wet. And we installed about 65 miles of drain tile on that project in about a 5-year period. Some of them were as large as 54-inch diameter. And it would provide the outlets that farmers could then tie into to drain their land. And we built the channel so we'd have outlets for that. And it was kind of ironic because at that time it was about the time when they were getting to the point of protecting wetlands, and it wouldn't happen today. That was kind of the tail end of the drainage work with Soil Conservation Service.
So where did you go from the SCS? Like how long did you have that job there?
I was there for 5 years, no, 7 years, I guess. And from there, I became the assistant state engineer down in Columbia, Missouri. And I worked there for 5 years, working a lot with the watershed program there. They had a little different concept of smaller dams and a lot of them in a watershed project. We did a lot on terracing. They had a new concept with narrow-based terracing at that time. We introduced that, and also doing some programs for underground outlet terraces. And we helped develop a storage method, or determining for storage requirements for underground outlet terraces that are still being used today over there, so in the Midwest.
Okay. So do you have like a philosophy about conservation?
Well, I think most of the farmers out there, they certainly understand the need for conservation. And I'd say the vast majority of the producers that we work with are always trying to leave the land better than when they found it. And that takes a constant effort with variability in the weather and with the crop prices and production, and just trying to stay in business. But that's what I like the most, as far as getting out, working with farmers, and you could go through a design on a practice or on a dam or whatever, and in a relatively short while you can go out and see the results of what you did. And especially now when you look back, it's been 50 years since it started, and you go back and see some of those practices that are still in place and still functioning.
So do you work mostly with farmers, or do you work with like city employees and that kind of thing?
Most are farmers. In the early days working with at the field offices, it was all working with farmers. And then as we got into the area offices as an engineer, we worked with the field offices on some of the larger projects they had. And then when we moved to the state office, then it was working on the larger projects and some of the design and management pieces. And then when I came to Oklahoma after 5 years in Missouri, and I was state engineer here, we were responsible for the engineering program for Oklahoma, which involved a lot of watershed work, but also the engineering practices for conservation practices for the programs.
So what are some of the most well-known or successful projects that you've been involved in that have had like a lasting impact?
Well, the ones that are most interesting to me for accomplishments, I think that first one, the first projects are always ones you remember, and the drainage projects was rather unique on those real large drain tile and channels. Working in Missouri with the terrace systems, that was something that was the narrow-based terrace concept was coming on new, and getting that established, and working with the rural abandoned mine land on reclaiming some of the strip mining, and over there that was kind of a unique project. But by far the ones that I'm most proud of and all is its watershed program. Especially once we got to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma has 2,107 of these watershed projects, more of those dams. more than any other state in the country. There's 12,000 nationwide. But they were all built back starting in the late 40s. The very first one of those 12,000 was built down by Cordell, Oklahoma, the first one in the nation. And they were designed and planned for a 50-year design life. And that seemed like a long time back then, but that seemed to go rather quickly. But most of those dams were planned and designed to protect agricultural areas for cropland and all downstream. Well, it wasn't too long after that people started figuring out that those were nice building sites down there. They never would have thought about building before because it always flooded all the time. But now all of a sudden, for some reason, they didn't flood, and they started building homes in some places close to cities, and all would be entire subdivisions downstream. Well, now those dams that were designed to protect agricultural areas now are protecting people's lives. And dam safety standards evolved during that 50-year period, but an awful lot of those dams did not meet current dam safety standards. On top of that, they were designed for a 50-year life, and over half of those 12,000 dams in the nation, almost 2/3 of those in Oklahoma, have now exceeded their 50-year design life. So now you add those two together, and we have, it's not that the dams are in imminent danger of collapse after 50 years, but just like any man-made structure, it needs some additional attention. Some of the materials are deteriorating. Some of the dams are filling up with sediment behind them. It seems like we're getting more extreme weather now for the large storms, so they need attention. So I think the most proud piece of the career that I was working with, in the late 90s, we had 1998, we had a big public ceremony down at Cordell, Oklahoma, that commemorated the end of the 50-year life of the very first watershed dam built in the nation. And Congressman Lucas was there, Chief was there, the governor was there, and there's about 800 people or a little more came to commemorate that. And that kind of started the national discussion formally on what to do with these aging dams. So I had the opportunity at that time to go on a special detail to Washington, D.C. and work with Congressman Lucas's office. And we had a great group of folks that we worked with from the National Watershed Coalition. John Peterson was heading that at that time. There was a Portland Cement Association had a lobbyist, I guess you'd call him, that was working on the Hill. And we provided information for every state, for every congressman, for every senator on the dams in their district. And Congressman Lucas had authored some legislation that would authorize NRCS to assist with communities and conservation districts to rebuild their dams to current safety standards and to extend their life another 100 years. And it took about 2 years to go through that process, through the efforts of a lot of different groups and a lot of different people. But on November 9th of 2000, the President signed the act, which giving the authorization for NRCS. And during that time, the Chief, Pearlie Reed at the time, the Chief of NRCS, had authorized a pilot project. So in Oklahoma, got that out at Sergeant Major Creek out at Cheyenne. And when that dam was completed, we had another celebration out there. About 1,000 people came, and we commemorated the very first dam that was rehabilitated. And shortly after that, I was offered the job in Washington, D.C. as the head of this new program for watershed rehabilitation. And I was there for several years as we were working with different states on getting their program started and working with the sponsors and on particular projects and getting that started. By far, that is the highlight of my career, that working on getting the watershed rehabilitation legislation established along with a lot of other people, and then following through and writing the policy and working with folks to get the program off the ground. And it's going today very well. Yeah.
So did you feel when you were in Washington, D.C. that you were sort of out of your element?
Absolutely.
It's so different.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hadn't been to D.C. before, and I felt entirely like a fish out of water. And I was always struck by how people the way they would articulate the different stories and all. And I'd mentioned that to Doug McCaleb, was a legislative affairs director there in D.C. for SCS and NRCS at the time. And I told him I really felt out of place. And he says, "Don't you worry about how he said, you're much more authentic in saying what you are and how you're saying it." And said, "Don't worry about all these other people that really don't have all the background with it, but sound good." So we went to a lot of hearings. We provided a lot of background. We talked to a lot of congressmen. That was a very interesting experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. So now, do all states have some kind of legislation passed?
The states didn't have to have the legislation.
Okay.
This is a unique federal program.
Okay.
These 12,000 dams that were constructed, they are not federal dams. They're federally assisted. The federal government, through SCS at the time, provided the funds and the expertise for planning and designing the dams and for constructing them. That was all 100% federal cost for the vast majority of these. The local sponsors of the projects, and they were generally conservation districts, in some cases municipalities, but generally conservation districts or conservancy districts. They were responsible for working with individual landowners to obtain easements on private land, and usually it was through an easement. It wasn't through fee title or whatever. It was from an easement that basically allowed the conservation district to come on the private land for construction of the dams, and then they'd also agreed to do the operation and maintenance of these dams after they were built. And the easements would allow them to go on to private land to operate and maintain the dams for a period of time. So the states already had the authority for working with the landowners, working on the projects. It was just that the federal government had a new program for appropriations that could provide them. The big piece on rehabilitation was a little different than the beginning. The flood control dams at the beginning were paid 100% for the construction with federal funds. On the rehabilitation of those dams, it was set up for 65% federal funds. So the local sponsors had to come up with 35% of that total cost, as well as in some cases get some additional land rights. So that was a very big challenge for them.
So how often do you have to do like a total overhaul or a total rebuild on a dam rather than just make repairs?
Well, they're inspected every year. They should be inspected every year for just seeing if there's any maintenance issues that are needed out there, cutting trees off and the dams, and checking for any erosion that's on there or if any problems with the pipes. And some of those will last well past their design life and function like that. But then issues start showing up as far as the reservoir filling up with sediment, or the materials deteriorating, or if we got a large storm and the water flowed through the auxiliary spillway around one end that's designed to safely convey those large storms. And they've worked very well, but sometimes when you get the really large storms, you get some erosion in that spillway. So there's repairs needed there periodically. And so that's just an ongoing part of the program. And sometimes you can go for 50 years and hardly do any work out there, major repairs other than the annual maintenance. Other places, if you have some large storms or have some particular issues, you could have some major repairs there once or twice during the life of the structure. And then when those that get funded are those that are beyond their design life and have people living downstream, then that's a complete reconstruction. So far nationwide, there have been about 300 of those dams that have been funded for rehabilitation. And about, as of beginning of this year, there's 145 of those that have been completed and have been fully constructed so they meet all safety standards. And those have been designed for a 100-year life from this point forward.
Okay. So what projects have you worked on in Payne County in particular?
In Payne County, we've had Stillwater Creek watershed comes through Stillwater. That includes 34 dams. It controls flooding through Stillwater, and a lot of people don't realize that. There's 11 of those projects that are in or very close to the city limits of Stillwater itself. University Estates, Boomer Dam, Wittenberg Lake, the one out here in the corner of the curve of Hall of Fame. There's a lot of dams there that you drive by every day that may not. Carson Creek, where Carson Creek Golf Course is, that's around Site 46. So there's a lot of those, but all those were constructed prior to the time I came here. One of the projects that was very interesting to me when it first came with Boomer Dam, that was one of those that was to be rebuilt. It was originally constructed back in the mid-20s and needed a lot of work. we started in that the year following me coming here in 1985, and we had to drain it, and that was kind of traumatic for some of the people living around it. And it turned out that there was we didn't have funding for the entire dam, so we had to build it in phases, in 3 different phases. So during that entire process took about 5 or 6 years. So a lot of those people in residences around the area that used to looking out over a lake were looking out over a dry lake in 5 years. But eventually all got constructed. We worked with DOT for location of the road. They built the road across the lake. Used to go over top of the dam. We worked with ARS, Agricultural Research Service, on the design of the concrete spillway, which is unique on its own, the only one like that in the country. It drops water 35 feet vertically. It's about, you could fit 2 football fields inside of it, end to end. And it, all of that work was done by the 1991, I believe, 92, when it was all the work was completed, the lake fell back up. But that was an interesting one, just working in town. Usually we're working out in the countryside where not many people are aware of it, but this one here was literally right in town and affected a lot of people, but it's worked out very well. Carl Weinog was the city manager at that time in Stillwater. He was very, very good to work with. We made it through in good shape.
Yeah. So since the Boomer Dam, a lot more people noticed it than they would for like a small creek dam or anything like that. Okay. So my question was just, what was it like being more in the public eye with the Boomer Dam than with, small watersheds?
Yeah, that dam was a little unique in that the other ones are usually out in the countryside and several people are aware of it and all, but not in their backyard like that one was. And there were especially some issues there with the city, because that Lakeview used to go across the dam and had to be replaced, and working with DOT and funding issues. Those that were all those people along Husband Avenue Street there, looking out of the front door. We used some new technology at the time where we took photos at every house looking at the lake before it was drained. And then we would superimpose what the new dam would look like, because we had to raise it.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a rock wall along that side to make it for the aesthetics, to make it look a little bit better. So we attended several city council meetings and went through a lot of questions and discussion going through the whole process. But interesting process, and worked out very well. Enjoyed going across and taking a look at that now. Brought back good memories.
Yeah. So I guess something that I was kind of wondering was, what would Stillwater look like if there weren't any of these dams? Would it just be like entirely flooded, or? No,
it would go back like it was in the 50s. And again, some years, like a lot of these communities across the country, if you get normal rainfall, or if you're in the middle of a drought, obviously you don't have the floods. 1957 was a big year for flooding across the Midwest, including Stillwater. And in those areas, they didn't have all of these dams upstream, and there was a lot of flooding throughout the town, usually around 12th Street and some other areas in town. So that's what got a lot of these projects going. In the early 60s is when the Stillwater Creek Watershed Project was formed. And a lot of those were formed in the 60s and in a lot of areas in Oklahoma because of all the flooding that occurred prior to that time.
So how did you get on board with the Boomer Lake project?
Well, that was just one of the dams that was planned but not yet constructed when I came here, and we got some initial funding for starting that. And when we got to them, we started working with the sponsors, and which was the Conservancy District number 16 in the Payne County Conservation District and the City of Stillwater. And we started through that process. That was the next dam to be working on.
So what is one of the most difficult parts of your job?
Oh, since I retired, I'm doing just the fun stuff now. This is good. I would say early on was probably the management and working with staffs and all. We get all of our training is technical on when you go through engineering, and we don't get a lot of experience or training on working with people. But the major part of this job is working with people, whether you're out working with individual producers or with conservation districts or cities or whatever. And when I first came here, I was very young. I didn't think so at the time, but when I was assistant state engineer in Missouri, I was 29 years old. and going to a new state and working in a state office was quite a change. When I came here, I was 34 years old, but I've been blessed all the way through with excellent staff that really took me under their wing, and I'd hate to think what it would have been like without them. But when I came here, the almost entire design staff, the engineering staff were 50 years old, some of them 60 years old. The vast majority of them were eligible for retirement at that time. But they lived and they worked through the time when they were building dams. At the peak time in Oklahoma, there was 157 dams built in 1963. And there was a 15-year period where it averaged 2 dams every week being constructed for 15 years. And when you think about that tremendous workload, from the sponsors getting land rights to doing the geologic investigations to doing the design and having the construction contracting piece and then having the construction on all of those, it was just a phenomenal workload for that whole period of time. And a lot of the people that were on the engineering staff when I first came here had worked through that period. So they'd had all these experiences with all the unique challenges with the construction in Oklahoma. And I recall when I first come here, we'd hear of a problem on a particular dam, on a seep or something like that. And they would immediately talk about, oh yeah, I remember when we constructed that and there was a wet area over on the left abutment and what they did with it. And I was still trying to figure out what part of the state they were talking about where this dam was, let alone all the details. But they did phenomenal work at that time, and they helped me through took me under their wing to help through a lot of difficult situations. But now we've had a complete turnover, and that's one of the challenges we have today as an agency and throughout the federal government, state government, that we have lost a lot of that institutional knowledge when a lot of this infrastructure was being designed and built. And now we're losing a lot of people and a lot of experience, and that's a real challenge as we start looking at rebuilding that infrastructure. We have to kind of gain that experience that everyone did by themselves here 50 years ago.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were the state assistant engineer. Is that what it was?
Assistant state engineer in Missouri.
Okay.
And the state engineer in Oklahoma for NRCS, SCS at the time.
Okay. And then in Missouri, that was right after you got out of your co-op, right?
No, after I got out of the co-op program in Iowa. I worked in Iowa for 7 years there in Mason City and on that drainage project, and then some dams up there also. Okay.
And then how did you end up in Missouri? So was that just like an open position that you thought
that you applied for?
Yeah.
Yeah, it opened up and applied for. And it was ironic, the reason that assistant state engineer position was open was that the state engineer in Iowa, Dewey Bondurant, retired, and they opened up that advertised position, and the former assistant state engineer in Missouri ended up getting that in Iowa.
Oh.
So we went up there. That left the position in Missouri open, so
I
went down there to fill there, and worked with just a wonderful state engineer. Hugh Curry was state engineer. He was the most unique person, most fun to work with. He got a lot done. Everybody knew him. Everybody respected him. And he had the knack of getting out and working with groups and having a fun time doing it. And I learned a lot from Hugh. I really respect him for all he did and how he did it.
Yeah. So that sounds like a pretty prestigious position. So what did you do when you were working there? We would
work with all the engineering programs in Missouri. That involved a lot of the terraces, waterways, underground outlets for the county, the field office. We'd work a lot with the watershed program. They had a very active watershed program there where they ended up building a total of about 900 dams. So that was very active. They were pretty progressive in Missouri, and they did a lot of the abandoned mine land work when that program came up. They also got a state sales tax, 0.1% sales tax that was devoted to conservation. So there was a lot of money coming in on the state level that would supplement that they got on the funding level there. So it was a great place to live in Columbia, Missouri, a great place to work with the people there. That was the hardest place we ever had to leave when we took this job over here.
Yeah. So from Missouri, it was straight to Oklahoma after that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, the state engineer who was here, Bob Gray, had went on to another position that left this open. And so I applied for that. And Roland Willis was a state conservationist at the time. And he took a chance on me. He didn't know me from Adam, and it was kind of a common practice at that time. You work your way up while you're in Oklahoma. And I know when I first came here, and I'd go to meetings, and they would say, "I don't recall your name. What part of the state are you from?" I said, "Well, I'm from Iowa." And that was always but now it's a lot more people coming from other states and all of that. But that was a challenge being the new young kid into a new state. So.
Yeah. So how did your job duties differ here than in Missouri or Iowa?
Well, there I was assistant state engineer and would work with Hugh Curry on what needed to be done, but he was responsible for the engineering program. He came over here, and I was responsible for the engineering program. So you get into more management and administration work. And I was also blessed with an assistant state engineer that was here, Gene Bollinger, who had been here for many, many years and knew everybody, knew all the programs and all that. And he was a huge help for continuing that on after I came.
Yeah. So would you consider your job or what you did dangerous or like high risk at times, or?
No. We would usually get out when we had large storms, widespread storms. Sometimes we would get up in an airplane to fly over the area, because many times you couldn't get out to see the dams because everything was roads were flooded, and we would get out and see where all the action was and see which dams were flowing through the auxiliary spillway. Probably the most frightening situation. We were back in 1986 or 87. They had a large storm that come through. A lot of dams were flowing through the auxiliary spillways, and we were up in Noble County in Upper Red Rock watershed, and we flew over there and we saw water coming out of the back of the dam, a place where it shouldn't be coming out, and that's not good. And the hole kept getting bigger and bigger. But we didn't have cell phones or anything at that time, so we landed at the airport. I forgot what airport we landed in, but we called back here, and pretty soon the staff all came up there, and we ended up, it eroded the dam out, and it had a big gash in the dam. We were especially concerned because there was a house downstream. But the way it turned out, the water didn't quite get up to the house. We found out that the people had moved out of the house about 2 weeks earlier. So it turns out there wasn't a huge risk, but we didn't know that at the time. So that's the one that when you see an issue or a problem like that developing and it's kind of out of your control, you can't stop it. It's just a matter of alerting people and getting people activated to take care of the situation.
Yeah. So how quickly were they able to fix it? And what does that look like whenever you have to fix a dam? Do you have to like drain the entire thing? Or?
Yeah, they drained the lake and came in, and it was a subversive problem, so they had to treat the soil. So basically they took off the top 15 to 20 foot of the dam, and then we replaced it with compacted earth. Basically rebuild a major portion of that dam. Yeah.
So this might seem kind of like a silly question, but where does all of that water go that you drain?
Just downstream where it used to go before. It just continues down in the creek where it was before. So all of these dams provide flood control. A lot of people don't realize the functioning of those dams. They think it's a nice place to fish and swim and all of that, and it is. There's a lot of secondary benefits. But the reservoir itself is sized to collect the sediment that's anticipated to be delivered to that dam over a 50-year period. So theoretically, at midnight on the end of the 50th year, that reservoir would be full of sediment, and that's what it was designed for. Most of them are not being filled up that fast, and I'd attribute that as a testament for the conservation practices that the landowners are providing upstream. They're putting in better conservation practices up there to keep the soil in place and not coming down to the dams. But that's for the reservoir, the lake itself. And then that area between that principal spillway that allows the water to go out there in that auxiliary spillway, which is the vegetative channel that safely conveys the flow around the end. That area is a detention pool. So what happens when you get these large storms, all of this runoff comes down, and there's only a pipe, many times 24 to 36 inch diameter, so it doesn't let very much water out. So the water level behind the dam rises, and it temporarily stores all of that runoff that comes down. And then after the storm is over, it sits there and it slowly drains out through that pipe. And then if we have several of those dams in the uplands of a watershed project, with all of those dams temporarily storing that large runoff that comes in during the storms, and then slowly released through the pipes, that provides flood control for the whole area downstream. So we have a lot of dams working together in a system that'll temporarily detain that runoff and then slowly release it over the next week or two, so that it prevents flooding downstream.
Mm-hmm. So what is a typical day like in the job that you were in? So like what would you wear, or what tools would you use, or?
Well, that changed a lot over the years.
Mm-hmm.
When we started out, every day we'd wear a sport coat and tie, shirt and tie.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting much more relaxed today, but I think that's society in general.
Yeah.
We would have, that was a nice thing about the job, a lot of variety. I mean, whether you'd be working with individual landowners on large projects, or working with field offices on training or inspections, or working on the watershed program with conservation districts or cities, or working with issues with their national office. I mean, it varied a lot that way. But the tools we had obviously changed a lot. When I started out on a survey crew, we had dumpy levels and a rod, and we'd go out and survey, and you'd have to spend the morning cutting a line through the brush and the trees so you could survey it. Working with transits and plane tables and all. So many times it would take two weeks to a month just to survey the land, getting ready for the design. Today we have GPS units, we have total stations that came through. We got LiDAR, which is a plane that flies over, and you can the imagery that they have, you can get the elevations of all of that land.
Wow.
So we can get the work that used to take a full month or more to do, we can get it in a few hours now. So we really get spoiled. Surveying equipment, computers, didn't have computers at the beginning. I remember when I was in college the last year, they came up with a Hewlett Packard, Texas Instrument came in with a programmable calculator. And could not believe that you could program a calculator like that. They were very expensive and couldn't afford it. But when we were first in the area offices, we'd have these old Frieden calculators. They'd have 200 keys on them, and it'd sit there and grind away. And then we went to the Texas Instrument TI-59s that had a little magnetic card that you could go through, and you could actually program some of the steps. So we developed a lot of programs for design of waterways and terraces and so forth. And then they kept getting more and more. And I remember at one time there, Hewlett Packard came out with one that you could program on a tape, that have a tape on it. And I remember writing a letter that saying, no matter what else comes out, this is all we need. If we could just get one of these for every engineer, we'd be all set. How wrong I was there. But when I was first in college, they had the IBM computers where we'd take computer classes, and we'd do all of our programming in different steps in BASIC. And then we take them to stand in line to take them to a card punching facility where they would punch all the cards for every step. And you go back the next day and you'd get your set of cards, and then you'd check them out, and then you'd take it back to them, and then they'd run it, and then they'd give you the results. But it would take about 2 days to go through that process. Yeah. So we've gone from that to the programmable calculators, to the computers, and now to smartphones that can do thousands of times what we were trying to do at that time. So we've seen a huge evolution of the technology.
Yeah.
Copy machines. When we were I remember when we got our first copy machine when I was in Iowa. And it was, you'd take the original and you'd put a pink sheet on the top and a white sheet on the bottom, and you'd run it through, and then you'd take the original out, and then you'd run it through again. And almost seemed like magic. Come up and there was an exact copy of what you just started. We thought, boy, you can't get any better than this.
Yeah.
And then we go from that to have the scanners and have everything we've got now. It's come a long way.
Wow,
so
that must have been something.
50 years.
Yeah. So is there anything that there's like a traditional way to do it, or that you still do in one way that you've been doing for a long time in terms of watersheds?
I think the main thing, and this is going to continue on hopefully forever, is just working with the conservation districts. That no matter what technology you have or what you have for building materials or what program you're working with, it still comes down to people. They need to be convinced that this needs to be done. And some people, that comes easier than others. And getting a group of people all to work together and think alike to get a watershed project formed, and to get easements and construct the dam, and then to operate that dam. It all comes down to working with people and for a common goal, whether it's flood control or water supply or whatever. So that'll never change.
Yeah. So what percentage of your work that you were doing as like the state engineer, what percentage of that was, outdoors, like actually working in the field, and then how much do you think you were doing like in the office?
Yeah, that changed a lot. When it
Mm-hmm.
first started, every day we were in the field.
Mm-hmm.
We were working in the field office. And then it got to be a little bit less when you were an area engineer because you had more design work to do in the office and less out there, but you were still getting out there a lot. And then when you get to the state office, it was, I'd say 2/3 of the time was in the office.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it was management and administration. And then when I went to Washington, D.C., it
Yeah.
was all there. I mean, I had a unique opportunity to get out to various states and all during that time, but it was, that was the part I missed the most of getting out on the countryside and talking with the individuals out there.
Yeah. So what types of things do you have to take into account when you're working with dams and watersheds, like environmental concerns or like bureaucracy hurdles?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, there's originally in just the basics of designing any kind of an earthwork structure. You got the geology, you got a geologic investigation to see what's in the foundation, see what the materials that you're working with for building the embankment. Just the basic resource information on determining how much water is coming to that site, what the vegetation is up there, so you can figure out how much the runoff coming in. Those are the very basic pieces. And then working through the design aspects, that's all the mechanics of going through the design. And then the other aspect is just working with people and convincing folks, trying to get the funding arranged and making sure that this dam gets funded both from the federal side as well as on the local side. And then after it gets constructed, then working with the sponsors on operation and maintenance. And the technology there has come a long ways. Before we used to, on these concrete pipes, when they'd put them in, you'd have to crawl up the pipes and check the joints every once in a while. Now we've got video cameras. The Conservation Commission has video cameras where you can go up and view the entire pipe, see if there's any problems on the inside. And they've got pumps and siphons and mowers and a lot of equipment that just had to be done by hand or not done at all early on. So it's changed a lot over the years.
Yeah. So what types of people would you work with? Did you work with like scientists, like geologists and botanists and that kind of thing, or?
We had a full array of, when we first started, there was geologists, a lot of surveyors, design engineers, project engineers, construction engineers. But along about in the 70s, 1969, the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, came on, where there was getting to be a lot more emphasis on the environmental side. And that started a role of historic preservation for cultural resources and a lot of water quality issues that came up. That really somewhat complicated the planning. It involved a lot more disciplines coming into being a part of the planning aspect. A lot more other agencies got involved in terms of permitting and reviews and all of that. So what used to take a relatively short period now, looking back at it, back in the 50s and 60s to get a project approved and designed and planned and all, it took a much longer time after the 70s with all these different acts coming in that you had to consider going through, and that still exists today. And I think while some of them it takes a lot more time and it takes a lot more, you get a lot more issues, it is being much more broadly looking at all the resources out there rather than just single purpose flood control that we started out with.
So what kind of like permissions do you have to get from whether that be at the federal or state level in order to pursue a project?
Well, after the project is planned and approved, that's one whole effort, and that goes through with the national office and Congress, and we have a public review time and that whole period. Once it gets approved, then when you get to an individual location for a dam, obviously the easements, you have to have the permission from the private landowner to build it, and that's a big piece of that. And then there's regulatory agencies, the Oklahoma Water Resources Board in Oklahoma. They're responsible for the dam safety program. So they review the design to assure that it meets state requirements for design of dams. Also go through the Corps of Engineers in charge with their 404 program that looks at a lot of environmental issues. In some states, they have water quality regulations that they have to meet. So there's several of those people with various agencies with various interests that you have to meet.
Mm-hmm. So how would a dam affect water quality?
Well, on some, not so much water quality itself, but there could be a lot of trees out there before that you need to take out, and there's some mitigation. You might have to plant some trees somewhere else.
Okay.
Just the water that's coming down to it in terms of is there any sources of water that's going to be stored there, and are you going to do anything with the sediment that's there that might have deposited? So there's opportunities there. Generally, most all the things we do is going to improve not only the flood control aspect, but also the water quality aspect. And a lot of that is due to the other practices that go into it, conservation practices upstream, the riparian areas along the dam, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So have you ever run into any problems with, whenever it's like a private ownership of land situation, have you ever run into any problems with farmers like not wanting that kind of thing on their property? Or
Yeah, and there was several dams. Some of them were concerned with maybe that area that maybe they owned the land where the reservoir was going to be,
mm-hmm.
and that might have been a very good cropland at that time.
Yeah,
and they were going to lose cropland, and you could understand how that would be a problem. It seems like early on there was a lot of concern for the landowners that they knew they may be giving up something, but they knew that it was going to help the community
mm-hmm.
in terms of flood control for the community.
Mm-hmm.
We still have some of that thought, but not near to the extent at that time. Most all these easements early on were all donated. They would donate them for the good of the project, and they'd also get some flood control aspect of it downstream if they had
mm-hmm.
land downstream. But now it seems like there's more. If you're going to get land rights, the sponsors pay for them
mm-hmm.
to get the privilege of getting the easements.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. So are you often met with resistance to your proposals to dams, not only from just private landowners or, but, from the federal or state level or anything like that?
Not from the federal level. We've enjoyed a lot of success where people understand the value of these projects, mm-hmm. not only for the initial flood control, but long about in the 60s, late 50s, they added authorization in the act to allow additional uses or purposes for these. And municipal water supply came. The very first one in the nation was down in Duncan. Mm-hmm. For Lake Humphreys was the very first water supply that was for city of Duncan. So usually when you go into those areas, that they're getting a huge value, and there's a lot of support for that. And later on, it opened up. The watershed program is one of the most comprehensive natural resource programs where you could address a lot of different resources. Initially it was flood control, but then later on it got into other types of projects. But you still have those that are concerned with from a land rights standpoint, mm-hmm. Or other issues that didn't want to have a liability out there or whatever. There's 2,107 dams that have been built, but there's still 331 dams that are planned but not yet constructed. Mm-hmm. In a lot of cases, that was due to funding. They didn't get enough funding for that. But in some cases, it was just resistance from a landowner that for whatever reason, they didn't want to have it on their land. So mm-hmm. consequently, there's still a big workload out there mm-hmm. if the funding comes and the people want them.
Yeah. So can you kind of break down for me just like where the funding comes from for these watersheds and dams?
On the federal level, it's all through annual appropriations.
Okay.
So Congress will appropriate funds each fiscal year, and they fund it specifically for the watershed program and for the watershed rehabilitation program. Mm-hmm. Those are two different funds. For the local cost share and easements and so forth, that comes from local sponsors. That comes generally, an awful lot of them comes from annual appropriations from the state legislature. Mm-hmm. In Oklahoma, they have put out provided the funds for not only operation and maintenance, but for the 35% share for rehabilitation and rebuilding. In recent years, with the struggles they've had in budget, that's gone down, and there's a lot of maintenance needs out there that are going unmet mm-hmm. because the funding is not there. There's a few conservancy districts that the landowners who obtain the benefits from these dams, they pay an annual assessment that goes in, kind of like on their property tax, where they pay for some of the maintenance. It's not very much money coming in. In other cases, cities, for example, for water supplies, they have to purchase the land fee title. And many of those are purchased through the cities. They also pay for the water supply aspects of the project. So it comes from various sources.
Mm-hmm. So who have been some of like the more well-known, I guess, personal like sponsors of dams?
Oh, there's a whole host of them there. Early on, Oklahoma has such a rich history in the watershed program. Not only for Oklahoma, but they were national leaders. Senator Kerr was very strong with in Congress. When I first came here, Congressman Wes Watkins was a real spokesperson and a champion for the watershed program. When he left Congress to run for governor, Congressman Frank Lucas, was just a young fellow coming on the scene, and he's the one who ended up authoring the rehabilitation program. So there's a lot of political leaders that were really helped make this go. But in the early days, folks like Red Males was a banker out in Cheyenne, a conservation district director. He would go all over the state. He understood the need for this, and he would really promote that. Nolan Fuquay, Dick Longmire, a lot of you see these lakes. Gene Neustadt, you see a lot of these reservoirs with their name on them because they were so instrumental. North Deer Creek project down by Shawnee is West Watkins Reservoir. He was very instrumental in getting that project off the ground. But also he was from the funding side, but he also worked closely with the local conservation district and in Potawatomi County Development Authority. There was a fellow there named Joe Tarrin. He was a dentist down there. And he promoted and followed that all the way through. And when they dedicated that dam, that's a very large dam, and we were down there for the dedication, which was quite a milestone after so many years of getting that one ready. There's a recreation facilities around it. It's about 1,100 acre lake, and it's a water supply for that area as well as flood control. But they dedicated the lake. They named it Joe Tarrin Dam and West Watkins Reservoir. And I remember Wes talking at the time. He said there wouldn't be West Watkins Reservoir without Joe Tarrin Dam. So it's when you look across the state, you see a lot of the reservoir names that are those are the people that were the leaders of the time, not only for Oklahoma but for the national program also.
Yeah. Wow. So I guess switching gears a little bit. So you've earned a lot of awards in the field of conservation. So can you just talk about some of those?
Oh, I don't know if a lot.
There were a few that I looked at.
Well, some of those during the time of the Watershed Rehabilitation Act, there was some recognition there for those that were involved in that, and that involved a lot of people. But I was fortunate to be a part of that. That was a fun time. We've had some with Association of State Dam Safety Officials. With all the state dam safety officials in the country, they have this association and an annual meeting. They have about 1,500 people or so. And that's when I was surprised at where they have an award of merit, their big award. That was shortly after we'd worked on led an interagency team on development of a sample emergency action plan for a plan that if there's a problem with these dams, that to have a plan to respond to that. And we got a lot of agencies together, and that's what that one was for. ASABE, Biological Systems Engineering, they have a fellow award. Got nice enough to get that here a few years ago. Back in 2009 or so, they have a Federal Engineer of the Year award for each agency, and that was NRCS nominee for that. That was a fun time. They come in with a nice ceremony and all, where they bring the family in, and that was a fun time. So
yeah. So what projects have you kind of spearheaded that have been the most successful, that maybe caught the eye of some of the people that were in charge of nominating for these awards?
Well, like for Association of State Dam Safety Officials, I think it was emergency action planning that we were working. And at that time, we were working through the Rehabilitation Act, which was the first program nationally that would provide federal funding for rehabilitation of these private dams. So that was a big piece there. The rest was just working with conservation, working with people, and some of the individual projects that came along with that. So.
Yeah. So was the emergency action planning, was that your idea or was that?
That was collective. There's very seldom do you ever have anything that just one person comes up with, but it's one of those of getting organized to get all those people that want to work on it and getting them together is a challenge in the first place. And then once they get together to all agree on how it should be done and pop out the other end, especially when you have several different agencies involved and different interests along the way. But that particular emergency action plan has been adopted in a lot of states where they've adapted it to their state and their state dam safety program, and it's been very, very successful.
Yeah. So has it still lasted in Oklahoma?
Still using.
Wow.
We're going to update it here this year due to with the experiences we've had in the last 10 years. And probably one of the best projects, not the best, but one of the most fun, was a system we started with and piloted here in Oklahoma about almost 10 years ago now, called Dam Watch. That we have all of this data and on all of these dams. And I was noticing as we go to these national conferences and so forth with dealing with dam safety, that a lot of the people that were involved originally were retiring. And those that were left behind didn't know where a lot of the data was. People would get transferred into a state and they didn't know where all the original construction drawings were, or emergency action plans, or inspection reports, or whatever. And that could be very stressful if you have a large storm and you have a problem with a dam if you can't find how the dam was built in the inspection reports. So we were at one of these conferences in 2009 down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And there was a firm from U.S. Engineering Solutions that had a program called Bridgewatch, where it was a web-based system where they had all the information on bridges, on how they were built and how they functioned, and inspection reports. And the more we were talking, we were thinking, well, a dam was nothing but a bridge with a hole plugged up in it. So we started talking to them about adapting their program for dams. And we found out that they had a small pilot up in Connecticut where they'd already done some of that on a small scale for less than 100 dams. So we convinced our national office to fund a pilot in Oklahoma. And it took a couple of years to get that established, and we have to include 2,100 dams in that system. But we got everything populated into this computer web-based system with all of the construction drawings, the emergency action plans, breach inundation map, that if the dam should break, what would area get inundated, the inspection reports, photos. We had about 30,000 documents that we scanned electronically and uploaded to this web-based system. And then it's tied to the National Weather Service. So we have the drainage area from each of these dams defined electronically. It's tied to the National Weather Service there, so that when the radar goes across and scans it, it starts accumulating what the rainfall is at each one of the drainage areas for each of those 2,100 dams. Wow. And then we have the capacity for each dam computed on how much rainfall it can take the runoff from until it starts flowing through the auxiliary spillway. So when the system will keep accumulating that data, and when it comes up for the drainage area for a particular dam exceeds the threshold that's been computed for that dam, it'll automatically send a cell phone text alert and an email alert to the people responsible for that dam.
Wow.
So before, it used to be that when we get a big rain, we'd know that it rained a lot in the south part of a county down in southeast Oklahoma. But then many times you had to wait 2 days to find out there's a problem because nobody could get out there because of the flooded roads. Now we get a real-time alert knowing how much rain was there. And now instead of waiting for the local reports to come in, we can direct people to go out and identify the dams that might need them the most, especially if they have some maintenance problems, or if they're a high hazard dam where there's a lot of people living downstream. We can prioritize the resources that we have. After about 2 or 3 years of that, this is going to be a 5-year pilot, but the success on it exceeded all of our expectations. So we started working with the national office in DC for NRCS, and they agreed to expand this pilot nationwide. So for the last 5 years, I've been working with individual states and working with the national office and with U.S. Engineering Solutions and their staff. And we now have this dam watch system in place that monitors all 12,000 dams in 47 states. Wow. So there's about 100,000 documents that have been uploaded now. We have everything tied into the National Weather Service. It's tied into USGS that'll monitor earthquakes, of which we seem like we're getting more here in Oklahoma. So when we get a certain size earthquake that shakes the ground to a certain extent beyond what the threshold is, we'll get alerts for seismic alerts for particular dams also. So it's been very successful. It's one before you had to come down to the office and you had to know that the drawings were in the second file from the left down in the basement. Now you can do it from your home computer, you can do it from your cell phone or iPad, so you can access all of that data from wherever you are. It's tied into a Verizon system, so when you're out in the field remotely, you can continue to get the interaction with the system to download the drawings. You can upload photos. If we have a technician who may not know what they're really looking at, the severity of it, they can take a photo of it, they can take a video of it, they can upload it, and somebody in another office from Stillwater or Fort Worth or DC or whatever, they can see real time what's happening out there and help guide that along. We have about 1,000 users lined up in that now. A lot of NRCS staff, some project sponsors, some emergency managers. So it's been very successful, and there's getting to be a lot of other agencies and other organizations that are getting very interested in following through with that technology.
Wow. So have any of the dams in Oklahoma been damaged by the recent surge in earthquakes? Or
we haven't seen any damage from the earthquakes on the seismic end. These are pretty massive earth embankments, and it's not like a rigid building coming down. But still, when we get above a certain size, people go to the field and take a look at them to see that there's not water coming out where it shouldn't be, in the cracks or the principal spillway, the pipe, and whatever. So far, we haven't had any issues identified.
Yeah. So I know that after the Dust Bowl happened, a lot more attention started being paid to conservation. So do you know how the Dust Bowl may have affected the attention toward watersheds and dams?
The Dust Bowl was the reason why we have a Soil Conservation Service and now a Natural Resources Conservation Service. Hugh Hammond Bennett was a scientist back with the Department of Interior and Soils and all, and he was the one who was really promoting the need for conservation. And one of the stories that he was trying to convince Congress to establish this Soil Conservation Act, and he knew the dust storms are coming in, and one big one was coming across the country, and I guess he knew about the time the dust was even going to be hitting Washington D.C. And it was during one of those hearings that he made it dramatic to the point where he knew it was coming. And he was talking about the need for conservation and all, and he opened up the curtains on the building and he said, and there's the dust from the Midwest coming through. Well, consequently, the legislation passed, and that allowed conservation districts to be formed where the federal government would work with them. And that started the whole effort in soil conservation. Ironically, and you wouldn't think this during the Dust Bowl with an extreme drought, but some of the floods of record in some areas they occurred during the Dust Bowl. In the 30s, in 1934, there was, right in the middle of the Dust Bowl, there was a flood out by Hammond, Oklahoma. And they got a large rain. The vegetation there was no vegetation out there because of the drought. There was nothing to hold that runoff back and soak in the ground, so it all ran off at the same time. And it caused massive flooding on the Ouachita River up on the upper ends. There was 17 people were killed as a result of that flood. There was one terrible story with a Wilson family, and they were in their house, and their house broke loose, and they physically rode their house down, and it in the flood, and it hit a railroad bridge, and it disintegrated the house, and all 5 members of the family were killed. But there were 17 people died at that time. That was about the time there was starting to be a national conversation on flood control. And in 1936, there was a Flood Control Act in 1936 was formed. And as a result of that, one piece of that was that allowed for studies of individual projects. There was 212 projects, I believe, where they started initial studies on the flooding and what could be done. Of those, there was 25 of them that actual reports were completed with proposals on how to deal with those. In the Flood Control Act of 1944, 11 of those 25 projects were approved for control of the watershed project, or establishment of watershed projects for controlling flooding. One of those 11 projects were in Oklahoma, and that's the Ouachita River Basin. So they were one of the first. The Little Sioux that I'd mentioned earlier up in Iowa, that was one of the 11. So there's 11 projects in 12 states. That allowed for some of the construction of these dams, and eventually in the Ouachita River Basin, there's 1,103 dams that have been built as a result of that. So that was the other aspect of this that was rather unique from the federal level. The Flood Control Act in 1936 is the first place where it said that the studies of the projects have to be shown that the benefits are going to have to exceed the cost. So that started what they call the BC ratio, the benefits versus cost. And that evolved through the Flood Control Act 1948 and is still a practice today. We have to compute what the benefits are going to be for that 50-year or 100-year evaluated life of the project. Compare that with what the construction cost is and the cost of that, and the benefits have to exceed the cost from since they're using public taxpayers' money for that. So that all started in the Flood Control Act in 1936. So with the Flood Control Act 1944, that authorized those 11 projects in 12 states. Those were very successful, and there was a lot of conversation going about how other areas could get some of those projects. In the Appropriation Act of 1953, there was funding for some pilot projects. There was 62 projects that was funded in about 30 states. And those were individual smaller projects, just like what was authorized in PL 534 or Flood Control Act in 1944. And then in 1954, there was quite a discussion on who should be the dam builder for the federal government. There was a lot of discussion between the Corps of Engineers and SCS. And a lot of discussion went on for a couple of years. And finally, in August of 1954, President Eisenhower signed the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Act. It was Public Law 566, and now you hear it referred to many times the Watershed Program or PL 566. That authorized this program for watershed projects to be established across the country. So the sponsors would request it. You go through the planning and go through the authorization that you could have these projects nationwide now instead of just in those original 11. From there was about 2,100 projects that were formed. Every state in the country has at least one. There's about 1,300 of them include dams, and those are the ones that we're working with today on. And we're still, the benefits from those, when they compute the benefits, average annual benefits each year, that totals more than $2 billion. Wow. So a little bit over $2 billion. So basically what that means from a flood control aspect, about half of that is from flood control, that if those dams were not in place, that there'd be on an average about $1 billion of damage each and every year. Wow. That doesn't occur now because those dams are in place. So that's why there's such an effort on trying to maintain what's out there, upgrade those that have people living downstream so that they'll continue to provide the benefits for future generations for another 100 years and protect those communities out there.
Yeah, wow. Well, your job is very important. So I guess the nation's, we talked about this earlier, but the nation's first watershed project was the Sandstone Creek watershed, which was completed in 1953. So do you have, or I think you talked about the 50-year anniversary of that. So can you kind of talk about that a little bit more? So
yeah, there's a lot of watershed firsts in Oklahoma, starting with the very first dam in 1948. On that particular one, the newspaper account said there was over 10,000 people that showed up at the dedication of that, just to show the interest in the flood control program at that time. Hugh Hammond Bennett was there, governor was there, the military band was there, politicians, and it was interesting just to see how. And this is out in the middle of nowhere out there. I mean, it was quite an effort to get that many people though. When we had the public celebration in 1998, there was about 800 people. But from there, it went on to the other watershed projects, and the Sandstone Creek watershed was one that Red Males had mentioned it from Cheyenne, was very instrumental in getting established. And there were 24 dams planned in that project, and they were all completed in 1953. So that's the very first watershed project nationwide where all the dams that were planned were all completed and working as a system. Wow. And in fact, if you look at the Oklahoma State Highway map, you look out in Cheyenne, there'll be a designation in there in red showing that the world's first completed watershed project for Sandstone Creek. Mm-hmm. The other first are the first multi-purpose structures, like Humphreys down there for water supply. In fact, in the I think it's Life magazine in 1959, the centerfold on that was an advertisement by Caterpillar, and it was talking about the construction of that lake and for Duncan. Mm-hmm. We also have the distinction of having the very first rehabilitation project, the Sergeant Major project out by Cheyenne. We're the very first one of these dams that NRCS worked with local sponsors on rehabilitating that dam. Mm-hmm. And that was the celebration that we had in 2000 out in Cheyenne.
Mm-hmm. So since Oklahoma has such like a rich heritage in watersheds and conservation, what are there any specific problems that you've encountered, but only in Oklahoma, with pursuing a watershed project?
I don't think there's anything unique to Oklahoma other than the sheer number. That there's a lot of states that might have 100 dams, some 200. About 50% of those 12,000 dams occur in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. Between Texas have right at 2,000. We have 2,100. There's in Kansas they have around 1,100. Nebraska has about 900. Iowa has about 1,100. Mm-hmm. So the vast majority of them, over half of them, are in the Midwest. So that brings with it the unique challenges of funding and keeping people trained for doing annual inspections to do 2,100 inspections besides the maintenance work. I'd say that's one piece that is unique to Oklahoma and a challenge not only for actually getting the work done, but also from a budgetary standpoint and the funds to get that done. But consequently, because of those numbers, the Oklahoma Conservation Commission has done a fantastic job on supporting individual project sponsors by having a lot of unique equipment, from mowers to the video cameras going up through there. They've got pipes or pumps and siphons, and they've got a tremendous amount of technology there, as well as the expertise on watershed technicians to go out and work on the slide gates, on risers, because they get rusted and have to be replaced. They've got a lot of experience and expertise that other states don't have, that have the lesser ones. So that's unique to Oklahoma.
Yeah. So are there any, what are some of the needs or problems that you've encountered in Payne County?
Probably nothing unique from the rest of the state, other than, like I say, working in the side of the city limits. Mm-hmm. That's a challenge from when you're out in the middle of an area there. But I think to a certain extent, you have probably better recognition of the need for flood control. However, there's still a lot of people that don't realize the dams are up there, let alone how they impact their daily lives. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be a constant education effort. That when you think about it, how should they know if the stories aren't out there? So I think that's a challenge to keep that education effort, with always talking about the stories of the previous flooding and what could happen again if they aren't maintained, and what the needs are for keeping them functioning like they were designed.
Yeah. So who are some of the leaders in the field of conservation that you look up to the most, or that have been an inspiration to you?
Oh, in those early days, and I had met some of them, but I've heard the stories on the Red Males and the Dick Longmires and Nolan Fuquays and the Lloyd Church and so forth. Don Vanderseipen was he was a watershed program leader when I first came here to Oklahoma. He was one who had tremendous amount of experience and a lot of respect. I know our national office would call him for advice once in a while, and from others. We have, when I first came, the or the construction engineers, Max Dominic and Mavis Jones. They had been through so many experiences with so many different contractors and construction. I really admired how they got that done. The rest, you can study something, go through the designs, but when you get into construction, you have to make a decision on the spot. If you found something different than what was anticipated, and working with contractors sometimes could be a challenge, and landowners and all those issues that come up. But they had done it. We had a soil mechanics engineer that was top in the nation, Norm Riker. He went to grad school. The service sent him to grad school to get in soil mechanics. He was one of the best in the country, and he developed that not only through training but also with that experience. We had design staffs. We had 2 or 3 design staffs who worked full time on this. They'd been through so many different projects that the design work was fantastic. Gerald Younger was the head of the design staff when I came, and Bob Sorrells. Those two had forgotten more than a lot of design engineers out here have today. So we were really blessed with having a full staff, an experienced staff, and those that were truly interested in keeping the program successful. And we're still benefiting from all of their work that they had.
Yeah.
And I think from a career standpoint, the Hugh Curry always will stand out to me for all just how he conducted himself and working with people and having fun. In Washington, D.C., when I was up there for several years, Doug McCaleb was a legislative affairs specialist and director and working on the Hill. Pearlie Reed was a chief at the time, and he was very strict and all, but this wouldn't have happened without him. He allowed us to work on the Hill with congressmen and with different agencies and all to get this act through, and he's the one who made that happen. There's been, I look back, since the agency was formed, since SCS was formed in 1935, there's been a total of 16 chiefs, the head of the agency. I've worked under 14 of those 16 during that time. The first 2 had quite long tenures, but from 1968 when I started to the president, which is, in fact, Memorial Day of this year will be 50 years from the day I started work in the county office back there. So during that time, there's been 14 chiefs that's going through. In Oklahoma, there's been 12 state conservationists since the beginning, the first state conservationist. I had the opportunity to work under 7 of those. So those are, and each one has a little different style. Each one during their tenure has different programs that come in, different challenges from funding and personnel and staffing and technology. So we've had an opportunity to work under a lot of good people.
Yeah. So one thing that I was kind of wondering whenever I was reading about this was, did many women work in your field, or how has that changed?
Initially, I'd say no. There was a lot of clerks in conservation district offices early on. But now it's, I think a lot of the engineering classes at Oklahoma State and others are half or more are female. And we're seeing that across the board with conservation districts and with the sponsors and municipalities, and it's I think we've really gained a lot that we were missing early on. But that evolved a lot in the past 50 years, as you can imagine.
Yeah. So you're currently an Earth Team volunteer, is that right?
Yes, I'm working part-time for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission.
Okay.
We're part-time state employees, and there's we've got 5 of us former NRCS staff that have retired over the past several years. But we're working, it's a lot of fun because we're working on those projects that you want to do without all of the other stuff that goes on administratively, management, whatever. And we've got a GIS specialist and a hydrologist and public affairs specialist, and the secretary I've worked with for years and years is with us. They work anywhere from 10 hours a week to 20 hours a week generally. So that's that part. We're doing a lot of assessment reports, emergency action plans, breach inundation maps, and so forth. But then still have the opportunity to be involved in some national aspects, like working on Dam Watch and working on some national efforts, working with individual states that have some challenges out there. So, and a lot of that is on a volunteer basis. They have
Mhm.
what they call an Earth Team volunteer. So that, and that just helping out some of the younger staffs and go to a number of the dam safety conferences and present papers on what we've been working on.
Mhm.
And that's always nice to keep up with what's going on around the country and share with them what we're doing here in Oklahoma. So
Yeah.
it's been a nice combination.
Yeah. So when did you retire from your previous position?
I retired in 2009.
Okay.
I had 41 years federal service at that time with NRCS,
Mhm.
and that's been 9 years ago.
Yeah. And did you immediately decide to come back, or did you take some time off?
No, in retrospect, I wish I would have taken a little bit of time to do some of those things, but it was almost like graduating from high school on Friday and starting
Yeah.
on Monday. It was about the same thing here.
Yeah.
I retired on Friday, and the start date on the state was the following Monday.
Yeah, you just couldn't get enough of it. So do you think that your particular sect of conservation will continue to grow as time goes on?
I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
It's needed.
Yeah.
And it's one of those areas, if not for building new dams, and we're starting to build new dams again. We went through a period there where we didn't get any funding, so we couldn't, but the last 2 years has been funded, and we're looking at construction of new ones. But especially for the rehabilitation aspect and the maintenance of these dams, somebody's going to have to do it. It's often compare that to an old county bridge, that both of those are part of the public infrastructure. They're both providing benefits to the public for many, many years. But there's a couple of main differences on that old county bridge, that it's visible enough and it keeps people from, they have to keep it safe to go back and forth, so they demand something be done on that. On these dams, a lot of these are in the upland areas that, like I say, most people don't even realize that they're up there, let alone how they impact their lives and that of their families. So that's a major difference as far as people clamoring for funding. The other piece, if that dam or if that bridge gets bad enough where it's a public safety hazard, they can always close it. You can put up the barricades, and people may not like it because they might have to go a longer distance to get to town or whatever, but you can protect the public. You can't put up barricades on dams. You can't say, okay, we'll come back to them after we get some more money. Something's going to have to be done with this, and it doesn't get the attention of roads and bridges and water systems and so forth that everybody can see and support. But it's going to be an aspect of their lives if we don't do something with this. So this flood control, and there's 12,000 of these nationwide, and over half of them are beyond their design life, and 2/3 of them here in Oklahoma. So it's something that's going to have to continue to have that attention and not go away.
Yeah. So what do you want others to know about working in conservation? So what would you tell somebody that's maybe considering a career in it?
I'm probably a little biased, but it's best combination you can get from being outdoors, working with the natural systems out there, working with people, generally working with people that really have come in, and it's a voluntary program, so they're looking for assistance and technical assistance. So they're looking for help with getting that done. Those that understand what you're doing, there's an appreciation for the flood control and the value to the community that's there. So, and especially in engineering, you combine the technical aspects of engineering along with working outdoors, seeing the results of your work and seeing a completed practice, and then working with the people that are going to benefit from that. And it's just nice driving across the countryside and seeing the signature.
Yes,
if you're in a plane and you get out and you fly across country, if you sit on the window seat and look out, you can see that signature of these watershed dams. And in some places you'll literally see 100 of them as you're going on a trip, but they'll all have that same signature footprint. An auxiliary spillway vegetated channel that goes around it, and have a square box there that looks like from there, but that's an inlet, and it goes into a plunge basin at the end where the outlet comes in. You can see that same signature, and no matter when you look out the window, generally you're going to be able to see some of those. And that's kind of neat to be a part of a program that has had that much of an impact across the country.
Yeah. So I guess my last question is, when history is written about you, what would you like it to say?
Oh boy. I think it was part of a very successful watershed program that tried to adapt new technology and tried to make people aware that there's a need out there to support this program so that these structures, these dams, can continue to provide support for the communities for future generations. I know my family has grown up in town almost ever since we've been married and grown, but I think as we've talked about them, they understand the need for those, and I think we need to have more people that talk about that and support that. And it's I think the agency has a lot of good folks that have been primarily raised on the farm, starting not so much now anymore, but it's a great family type organization. I know couldn't have got through all this without the support of my wife, who's been very understanding with all the traveling we've done, and she's kind of the rock of the family back home while we've been running on all of this. And we've got 2 wonderful daughters and grandkids and 4 grandkids. Writing all the papers, she's struggled through, and she's saved me from embarrassing myself many times through here. But it's an organization that's just a great family organization, and you feel like you've made a difference out there in the community lives out there.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
I'll probably think of something tomorrow.
Well, thank you for meeting with me today, Larry. I really appreciate it.
Always enjoy talking about the watershed program. People will listen.